Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we'll be doing another episode of our Planet Zoo Mod Spotlights. Been a little bit, just life being life, I guess, but decided to get stuck into this one. So, as I mentioned, we're doing part 155 of our Planet Zoo Mod Spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. And today we've got quite an interesting assortment of animals, and one I'm actually quite particularly excited to talk about near the end. You probably saw it in the thumbnail. We finally managed to get a Sumatran rhino, so I'll be excited to talk about that. But we've got a few animals, a few remasters, some extinct animals, and some other really cool animals to talk about as we go through. So we're going to be starting off by looking at Narwhala's red and white giant flying squirrel, not lemur. So this is based on lemur, but this is done by Narwhal. There's a nice big squirrel there. So the red and white giant flying squirrel, or Peniturgia albarufus, as people say that. These guys are a species of squirrel, and where they get kind of their name, they're very large. They have a dark red color to them and white on their face, and typically live in altitudes between 800 to 3,500 meters, or between 2 to 11,000 feet, in mainland China. And there is a population in Taiwan, even though they're often considered different species. And the red and white squirrel probably ranges around most of Northeast and South Asia, and far north and mainland Southeast Asia, so quite a wide range. And it's considered a few different subspecies. But we kind of don't know the situation less clear, and the other one, as I mentioned, has been sometimes considered its own species. And then another one, the Taiwan giant flying squirrel is often considered a thing. But these guys are quite a wide range, typically found across a lot of Southeast Asia and mainland China and places like that. So in terms of appearance, these guys are often called the largest of all the flying squirrels, although there's a few other species that do match its dimensions. At least some of its dimensions. The head to body length is about 35 to 58 centimeters, or about 14 to 23 inches, and its tail is about 43 to 61 centimeters, or 6.9 to 2.4 inches long. With little data available on the weight and Charlie's maiden ones, although one source suggests they're just under 1.2 to 1.9 kilograms for the mainland population, this is based on study of Taiwan, and then one was actually weighed at about 4.2 kilograms, which made it the largest of any gliding mammal, which is quite cool. Whether it's normal for the mainland population is unclear. Other flying squirrels with a max similar lengths or body weights, like the Bhutan giant flying squirrel, the red giant flying squirrel, and the woolly flying squirrel, have been maximum between 2.5 to 3.5, 2.5 to 3.2 kilograms, or about 5 to 7 pounds. So these guys would likely have been quite a bit bigger. But part of the reason, as I mentioned, why they get their name or appearance is because they've got that red and white on them. So let's have a look at this one. He's kind of having a scratch there. So they have these dark rufous red upper parts with like this buff or straw colored patch on its lower back. And the throat and head are white, often with a rufous patch or like a red patch around each eye. And this can, depending, especially on the feet, it can depend like if they're more blackish or russet or an orange-brown color, depending on the subspecies or population, especially the Taiwanese subspecies. There's no difference there. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about their gliding. So gliding, how they glide is very similar to other species of flying squirrels. How they glide is that they have a patagium, or like a big flap of skin that goes from their wrist to their ankles, and then they were able to leap into the air and kind of put that out to catch the wind, and then they can also move because it's like got a bit of muscle to it. They can actually change and adjust it a bit to allow them to glide, which is quite cool. And then they pull up their padded feet. They have padded feet and they have sharp claws to grip and kind of cushion the impact of them gliding, and be able to cushion that and be able to grab onto things and climb around, which is quite cool. And also they keep quite nocturnal habits, so they avoid skilled flyers like eagles and hawks. However, they are preyed upon by owls. And worldwide, there's about 44 different species of flying squirrel, but most of them live in Asia, and only 2 species are found in the Americas, which is the northern flying squirrel and the southern flying squirrel, that both live in North America, and also like from Canada down to Florida and Central America. And actually, gliding itself has evolved a lot independently among a lot of mammals. There's the gliding possums of Australia, which are marsupials, and the colugos of Southeast Asia also glide. Also the scaly-tailed flying squirrels from Africa. So it's very something common. Even though they glide in a slightly different way, they do have the same quadriptegia thing like that, and how it divides and things like that. The colugos have like winged membranes between their wings, but they all kind of glide. It's a great example of convergent evolution, and it's quite cool. And these guys luckily do have considered a large population, so they are considered least concern. So really, really cool to have a least concern animal. So that was Narwhalo's red and white giant flying squirrel. So that's a lot to take in there. So now we're going to have a look. This is one we've already covered before, but Great Cakes Mod, who always makes great mods, did a remaster for it. So this is what I'd consider... this is called Cerus, or Cerus major. So these are look very cat-like or saber-toothed cat-like, but they're actually an enravid, as we get to, or a false saber-tooth. So these guys come from the early Oligocene of France, and its fossils are found in Cerus, or early Oligocene, where it gets its name. And this is considered the largest of all the nimravids. As we get to what nimravids are, they are considered the largest of them all, getting about the same size as a modern-day lion. And the only species is Q major, which is the major species. And would have lived in kind of humid and moist forests in Oligocene Europe with long Eophilus, which was another nimravid which was much smaller. But yeah, this is much better anatomy, I think. So this is one of the last of the like the latest and greatest, you could say, of the nimravids known. And weights have been estimated to be comparable to modern lions at about 140 kilograms, and was only matched by large members of Barylambda, which is another related group of false saber-tooths that are considered nimravids. They grew quite larger, and they do look a lot like actual felines, so you could easily confuse it for a cat. They somewhat resembled actual, felines with that shortened snout, things like that, but they're actually more closely related to civets than they are to modern cats. And that is a great example of convergent evolution. They're two independent lineages, especially like the Macarodonts that include Smilodon and Macarodus and a lot of those animals, Homotherium. So they evolved independently to look like that because they do the same thing. A great example of convergent evolution. And it would have been the largest predator in Europe, one of them. They would have been able to prey on large animals. And they would have been sensorial, so they would have been climbing on trees and stuff like that, kind of like leopards, potentially hunting prey. And they were designed, they had less elongated fangs than the Macarodonts and Barbophilids. But these guys would likely attack large herbivores in their niche, which is quite interesting. See, another really cool mod. I love that it's got a bit of an update. I think it definitely looks a little bit better now. I really love seeing these mods get a bit of love. And we'll have a look at the cute little baby. Where's the cute little baby? Is that the female or the baby? That is the baby. Let's have a look at the cute little baby. How can you not love these guys? I love it's got more of like a Barbophilid look, which is quite cool. Really, really awesome. So that's another banger from Great Cakes mod. So next up, we've got by Genora Pizza and Gaboy, or mainly Gaboy, adding some new variants to the Chital. So you can have a look at the Chital, or the Axis deer. I'll just refer to it as Chital. Its scientific name is Axis axis. It's also known as the spotted deer, Chital deer, or the Axis deer. I'll just refer to it as the Chital. So these guys are very interesting. They were first described by Johann Christian Poncap Expert in 1777, and was placed in their own subgenus Axis under the genus Cerus, so like other ducks, and then they not other ducks, other deer, and then put it as their own species. So they're closely related to the Indian hog deer. And the sister genus is Rusevich, which includes the Sombach's deer and the Barsinger. The Somsburg deer is extinct, or believed to be extinct. But these guys have been found living in the early to middle Pliocene, so living with animals like sun bears, stegodons, scars, gowers, and wild water buffalo. But they're quite cool. They are moderately sized deer. They reach about 90 to 100 centimeters, or 35 to 39 inches in females, 65 to 65 inches at the shoulder, with a head to body length of about 1.7 meters, or about 5'7", with immature males typically weighing between 30 to 75 kilograms, or 66 to 165 pounds. Lighter females will weigh between 25 and 45 kilograms, 55 to 99 pounds, and then a mature stag can weigh up to about 98 to 110 kilograms, or about 216 to 243 pounds. So the tail, as you can see, is marked with a dark stripe that stretches along its length, and males are quite sexually dimorphic. You can see they're quite a bit larger and have large antlers. And their other name, as I mentioned, the spotted deer, they typically have a kind of orangish pattern to them, but sometimes they get variations where they get darker or lighter, but they do have those spots all over them. And like other deer, these guys will shed and lose their antlers, and very interesting like that. You can see they've got they get the velvet and that grows up, and it's quite cool. In terms of the distribution of habitat, they are an Indian deer, so they're typically found around India, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. Western limit is kind of the eastern Russia and Gujarat, and then found into Bengal, and then down into the Sundarbans, and then the Nicobar Islands are even considered the some limit of their distribution. But they have been introduced into a few other places. They've been introduced into Australia for hunting. They've also been introduced to the United States. They've been found they were on Hawaii. Introduced there for hunting, also introduced into Texas for hunting, and Croatia they had a population about 200 individuals, and in Colombia there has been a sighting of introduced deer herds over there, so they are kind of invasive and or introduced to other areas. So in terms of the cheetah, they are active throughout the day. In the summer, their time is spent under shade, so they typically avoid the heat of the day, and the sun's glare to avoid temperatures of getting about 27 degrees, and they get their activity peak during dusk and dawn. And do that, they typically, they rest during the midday, they fall asleep a few hours before sunrise, and kind of graze when dawn, in the morning and in the afternoon, when it's a little bit cooler. So when cautiously inspecting the vicinity, these guys will stay motionless and then look for potential predators, and then they kind of flee in large groups, as you know, safety numbers. And they're quite good jumpers. They can clear a fence as high as 1.5 meters tall, but they prefer to dive under them, and they will stay within 300 meters of cover, so they don't need to go, they'll just hide in cover. In terms of herds, they do live, they're gregarious, so they do live in herds. Typically, they have matriarchal herds with an adult female and her offspring of the previous and the present year. And then they sometimes have small herds of either sex, male herds or herds of juveniles and mothers. Small herds are common, but they do sometimes get herds of up to 100 individuals. And they're quite loose. Depending where you are, like Texas, they have an average of 15. Herds can be up to 5 to 40 members in India, so there's a lot of variation there. But these guys are kind of a little bit lower down the ecosystem, so they do have a lot of predators. That includes Indian wolves, tigers, lions, leopards, pythons, dholes, dogs, crocodiles, and juveniles or fawns will be taken by fishing cats, jungle cats, foxes, eagles, and golden jackals, with males being less vulnerable just because they're bigger. They're quite vocal, though. They are quite vocal animals. They do make calls that are not as strong as elk or red deer, but they do make these loud bellows and things like that. And very similar to them, they like guard females during estrus and, fight each other for these females, which is interesting. And they have been actually known to bite each other as well. Common miners are often attracted to them because they have a symbiotic relationship. Also with the northern Great Plains langur, which allows them to spot for tigers and other predators. In terms of grazing, these guys are mixed feeders, so they both graze and browse, and they mainly feed on grass throughout the year, but then sometimes they will feed on browse and things like that. Depending on the time of year, there's always a bit of variety there. They've also been observed to eat red crabs, which is quite interesting. But in terms of reproduction, they typically breed throughout the year, but it peaks depending on the geography. So we'll have a look at the little baby, we'll have a look at the female, then we'll have a look at the little baby, and then we'll look at the female. Anyway, so sperm is produced year-round, and though testosterone levels register in fall during the development of the antlers, and females will go through an estrous cycle about 3 weeks, and the females can conceive up to 2 weeks to 4 months after birth. Males sporting those large antlers, to fight each other for females and estrus. And then once the baby's born, they are able to pretty much, they are hidden for a week after birth, which is actually pretty short compared to most other deer. And the mother fawn pair is not very strong as they get often separated, but they easily reunite. If the fawn dies, the mother can breed once again, and they can breed, twice a year. And the male continue to grow until the 7th or 8th year. And the average lifespan for a captive axis deer or chital is about 22 years, though in the wild they don't live past often 10. But in terms of their conservation status, they are least concerned. They have a wide range and large populations. However, they are below ecological carrying capacity in many places because of competition with livestock and domestic hunting. And they do have some local extinctions, so there is efforts to try and help them, which is quite cool. We always love efforts to help our species. But yeah, really, really cool. Definitely a big fan of the chital. So yeah, another really nice mod. You can see the variation there. This one's got a darker one. The normal male is a little bit lighter. So that's a great way to look at, some new variations, things like that, some new changes. You can see that's more your typical color. But yeah, that's a cheetah. Very, very awesome. Good boy, Engineer Pizza, always doing a wonderful job. So next up, we got another Great Cakes mod. We're going back into prehistory for an animal I've wanted to talk about for a while. And I know it looks like a ground sloth, but it's not. So this is Barylambda, which means heavy lambda, which is reference to its larger size to its relative Pantolambda. So these guys are a pantodont mammal. So these are one of those weird animals that kind of came around, weird mammals that came around right at the end of the dinosaurs. And lived from the middle to late Paleogene, so between 60 to 50 million years ago. So it was one of those really weird mammals, one of the first ones to get quite big, which is quite cool. And is well known from Colorado and Wyoming. And there are 3 species recognized. This is Faberi. But these actually are believed to live like similar to a modern tapir, browsing on foliage and soft vegetation. And they seem to be quite successful for early Pantodon, and they would have replaced... but they seem to be replaced by other pantodonts in the ecosystem, such as Cobribodon. So in life, these guys would have looked, very superficially like a giant ground sloth, but these, you could say giant ground sloths, copied the pantodonts, because these guys came first. They had small heads, well-developed tail, and bear-like arms and legs. And they were quite big, even for the time. They were about 650 kilograms, or 1,430 pounds. It's about the size of a pony. And they were large even for a pantodont, so these guys probably just used their large size to protect themselves from carnivores. And like other types of pantodonts, so pantodonts were, gave birth to live young as well, so they weren't marsupials, they were eutherian mammals. So like other pantodonts, they were heavy set, they had 5-toed plantigrade feet, and their tail and their vertebrae was unusually massive, so it's believed these guys could have potentially reared up on their back to, reach for trees or things like that, reach higher up for food. They also have generalized appearance in their teeth and the presence of well-developed canines, and the lack of shearing blades on their molars and the animal's heavy build. She just was herbivorous, but they may have had well-developed canines, as I mentioned, only in males, so that could have been something they used to fight with for females, potentially. But yeah, really, really cool. I just want to see one of you guys get up and move around. Well, have a look at the little baby, though. So look at this little cutie. How can you not love this little guy? It's a really cool... It's one of those animals that is reconstructed always really weird and shrink-wrapped, but this is a great example of a great Barylambda reconstruction. So I'm very happy that Great Cakes mod definitely gave this species the love it deserved. And we'll have to get this one to move around a little bit. See, let's have a look. See, you can see they're running around a little bit. But yeah, this is definitely a good reconstruction of Barylambda. I'm very, very happy with this. It's one of the first good ones, because everyone kind of shrinks wraps it and makes it look really, really weird. But I think it looks really, really nice just seeing it, and it's all its very fluffy glory. I'm a really big fan of this mod. Definitely one of my top favorites of... Great Cakes, definitely a great one. But speaking of Great Cakes, she's done the rest of this pack. She just pumps out all these mods. So we're going to have a look at a couple related species as we're going to. But we're going to start off with the American mink. So here's a really, really cool one. So the American mink, or Neogale vison, these guys are a semi-aquatic species of mustelids, so rated at otters and things like that, of North America, though they have been introduced to places such as Europe, Asia, and South America. And they are considered least concern. And they were thought to be the only extant member of their genus. They're thought to be the only extinct member of the genus, but then they have the sea mink. But then the sea mink was actually considered something different, which is quite interesting. So in terms of evolution, these guys are kind of more specialized than the European mink, their relative in terms of carnivory. And fossil records show that they were around in the Pleistocene, and they basically lived in the same range. It didn't differ much in terms of morphology, which is quite cool. And there's about 15 different subspecies recognized, but we don't really like going too much into them because it's kind of neither here nor there. But these guys are quite different from other members of their genus, as well as other members of Neogale, as they have a larger size and stouter form, so they look more similar to martens. And they also have, they also share with martens large, bushy, and tapering tails, which is quite interesting. And they're quite similar in build to the European mink, but they are considered their tails a little bit longer. They do have quite a long body that allows them to enter burrows of other species, like muskrats. And their skull is similar in size to European mink, but more massive, narrow, and less elongated. And they do have a shorter cranium and kind of a little bit bigger teeth. So they were a little bit more, as I mentioned, well developed for carnivory, which is quite cool. Having a sleep there. Really cute. Typically, males will measure between 13 to 18 inches, or about 34 to 45 centimeters in body length, while females measure 12 to 15 inches, or 31 to 37.5 centimeters. And the tail was about 6 to 10 inches, or 15 to 24 centimeters in males, and about 6 to 8 inches, or 14 to 21 centimeters in females. Weights can vary between seasons and sex, with males typically being heavier than females. In winter, they weigh between 1 to 3 pounds, or between 500 to 1500 grams for females, and about 1 to 2 pounds, and females will weigh about 1 to 2 pounds, or about 400 to 780 grams. Males are a little bit bigger. And maximum heaviness is typically in autumn, they're building up their fat reserves. So in terms of fur, they do have denser, longer, softer, and more close-fitting fur than their cousins, the European mink. And very similar to them as well, they have like a darker color. And they do have guard heads that are kind of bright and, protect the under hairs that, generally keep them warm, especially in water. They also have the thick under fur and oily guard hairs, kind of water resistant. So that's why they've kind of been used in, lots of, people skin them and use them in lots of cloaks and things like that. And it's kind of considered to be in between those of otters, which are like a really semi-aquatic, and then polecats. So they're kind of in the middle. They're in that middle niche. And they do have a molt twice a year, so they get like a spring and autumn. They have a winter coat and a summer coat, pretty much. In terms of locomotion, they do have a bounding gait, so they can run around. They also can climb quite well and swim quite well. During swimming, they actually propel themselves using the undulating motion of its trunk, and then Aguero's bradycardia, which is actually an adaptation to conserve oxygen. And they can swim for 3 hours without stopping, but cold water they can die within 27 minutes, so they like a little bit warmer water. They generally dive to depths of 12 inches for 30 centimeters for 10 seconds, though depths of 3 meters lasting 60 seconds have been recorded, and they just like to kind of swim a little bit just to catch fish and things like that, which is quite cool. Is that one of the babies? Anyway, we carry on. So these guys have quite good senses. They rely heavily on sight when foraging, and their eyesight is clearer than that on land and underwater, but they are able to detect ultrasonic sounds for rodent prey, and they do have a comparatively weak sense of smell. They do have 2 anal glands for scent marking, very similar to other species of mustelids. And it's quite interesting. They can expel it, up to 12 inches or 30 centimeters away from them when they are stressed. They have like a secretions that they can use. And it's very similar to those. It's more unbearable than those produced by skunks, and actually one of the few substances considered animal, vegetable, mineral origin that is aware of, let's say, Nadia. So yeah, quite cool. So in terms of social and territorial behaviors, these guys typically will have territories that are held in individual animals with minimal intersex overlap, but then they'll have between animals of the opposite sex. So typically they'll have one with males and a couple females. That's what overlaps. And most territories are undisturbed, rocky coastal habitats with broad littoral zones and dense cover, so they quite like those kind of areas. They'll sometimes live in rivers and canals and estuaries near urban areas. Typically, home ranges are between 1 to 6 kilometers along, and the males have larger territories than females. As long as it's close to water, they're not really fussy about choices of den. But they also like to live around riverbanks, holes, tree stumps, or roots of hollow trees, and crevices, things like that. They typically dig themselves burrows that are between 4 inches in diameter and may continue to be 10 to 12 feet, or about 300 to 370 centimeters, and a depth of 2 to 3 feet, So that's kind of how long they can be. And they also made nest in burrows kind of previously made by muskrats, badgers, and skunks, and even dig dens in old anthills. And the nesting chamber at the end is about a 4-inch tunnel with about a foot in diameter, which is drawn with straw, which is warm, dry, and lined with feathers and things like that to keep it warm. And they're characterized by having a bunch of passageways that they're able to visit. So typically, in terms of vocalizations, they only vocalize during close encounters with other minks or predators. And the sound it emits includes like screams, shrieks, and hisses and things like that. And kits will also squeak when they're separated from their mothers. They also can kind of now growl or snarl when they're countering a threat or confronting a threat. but during aggressive interactions, they assert their dominance by arching their backs, puffing up, lashing out their tails, and stomping, trying to make themselves very, big and strong. And then they sometimes will fight with each other and can get injuries around the head and neck. But these guys are quite promiscuous, so they do not form mating pair dons. The mating season ranges from February in the north to southern April. In the introduced range, though, they breed much earlier than the European mink. They commonly fight during the mating season, and they have like kind of loose hierarchies depending on them. The mating season itself lasts for 3 weeks, with ovulation being induced by the presence of males. And the males will fight each other quite violently for females, and females are typically receptive between 7 to 10 day individuals, and can mate with multiple males. And as with other species, they're actually the only mammal to mate in spring that has a short delay before the implantation. So typically have delayed implantation for pregnant minks to be able to, track the conditions of the world, to make sure they can have their baby at the best time, which is quite cool. Typically, gestation lasts for about 40 to 75 days, with actual embryonic development beginning about 30 to 32 days of development, indicating that delay can be between 8 to 45 days. The young are typically born in April, June, in litters that are consisted of 4 kits on average, and they often have multiple different fathers. Exceptionally large kittens have been litters with 11 kits, have been recorded in 11 to 16 have been quite big, but they are blind at birth. They weigh about 6 grams and covered in silvery white hairs. They are dependent on their mother's milk, and then their eyes open about 25 days, and they wean after 5 weeks. They begin hunting on their own about 8 weeks old, stay with their mother until autumn, and then sexual maturity is kind of occurred about the kit's first spring when they're about 10 months old. So in terms of being a predator, these guys are quite efficient predators. They are carnivorous, so they feed on rodents, fish, crustaceans, amphibians, and birds, and they kill a lot of vertebrate prey. So they typically kill things by biting the back of the neck, leaving puncture marks that are about 9 to 11 millimeters apart. They often will kill birds, including large seagulls and cormorants, by drowning them. But its natural range, fish is preferred prey. Although inferior to the North American river otter to hunting fish, they have been recorded eating large trout, and they will inhabit the prairie slopes, then target frogs, tadpoles, and mice. So they pretty much just eat what they can get around. In some areas, though, they like to hunt voles, fish, crustaceans, insects, things like that. Depending on where you are in the world, they've been introduced, as I mentioned, to Europe, so they do hunt like European things and things like that. And they can be a threat to poultry. So. We're good. All right. So in terms of relationship with other predators, they have replaced the European mink in their native range, which is a little bit sad, and it's caused a great big decline in the American mink and also the European otter. They do overlap a bit, so there's a competition there. But in their natural habitat, things like bald eagles and great horned owls will occasionally hunt minks, things like that. And in terms of intelligence, they are considered quite intelligent. They do have quite visual learning, so they seem to be quite smart. So, which is quite cool. Let's see. So, in terms of its range, they typically live around most of North America, from Alaska through Canada, into the United States, except for places that are more arid, like New Mexico, Western Texas, California, places like that. But they've been introduced to Argentina, southern Chile, and Western Europe, where they were first, they're domesticated for the fur trade, but sadly, they got out and, kind of caused declines in European mink populations. But they've also been introduced to USSR and Iceland. And they get bit by a bunch of disease like spread by ticks and things like that. The decline of wild mink is because of numerous incidents between domestic minks escaping from fur farms. They've caused the population to kind of decline a bit. So domestic minks are typically larger than wild mink, and that causes problems. They're typically solitary, and sometimes in times of overpopulation, they'll kill each other, things like that. But yeah, we do have an interesting relationship with them. There's lots of disease. We we trapped them and raised them up and domesticated them for their fur, and we farm them. We get lots of color mutations, and they do make okay pets. But yeah, really, really cool. Definitely love a nice mink. Really, really awesome. So let's have a look at the European mink now. So that was the American mink. Both are done by Great Gex Mod, by the way. So let's have a look at the European mink. Sorry for the difficulties there. But we have got here the European mink. Look how beautiful he is. So this is the European mink, also known as the Eurasian or Russian mink. So they're quite similar to the American mink, but they are a little bit less specialized and a little bit smaller. And despite having a similar name, they're not actually that closely related. They're actually more closely related to the polecat or the Siberian weasel. And they will occasionally or occur primarily in forest streams, and they are unlikely to freeze in the winter. And they prey along voles, frogs, fishes, and crustaceans, things like that. And they are sadly considered critically endangered due to ongoing reduction in numbers, being more than 50% over the past 3 generations. And this began to shrink a lot during the 19th century, and have actually become extinct in some parts of Central Europe. And it's thought to have been due to a range of factors, including climate change, competition with the introduced American mink, decline in crayfish, hybridization with polecats, habitat destruction, and things like that. So it's kind of sad. But fossil finds of them are very rare, but they seem to have been originated in North America, potentially, from a relative newcomer, or recent speciesization. Genetic analysis show, though, that these guys are more related to polecats than the European American minks, so they kind of is a great example of convergent evolution. In terms of their build, they do have a typical, muscular build, with elongated body, short limbs, and as I mentioned, they're quite similar to the American mink, though they're just a little bit smaller and don't have quite a big booty skull. Typically their size, they're less specialized for carnivory than the American mink or that of polecats. So typically males will measure between 373 to 430 millimeters, or about 14 and 16 inches in body length, while females measure 352 to 400 millimeters, or about 13 or 15 inches in body length. Tail length is about 153 to 190 millimeters, or about 6 to 7.5 in males, and then about 150 to 180 in females. Overall, their weight is typically between 550 to 800 grams, or between 1.2 to 1.7 pounds, and they're quite agile swimmers, and they can swim and dive, quite effectively, and they also be known to run along stream beds and stay underwater for like 1 to 2 minutes, and swimming and paddle like the front and back limbs simultaneously. They're doing all right. So in terms of their fur, they have very thick and dense fur, but not quite as long and quite loose-fitting compared to American mink. The underfur is particularly dense compared to those of more land-based members, and their guard heads are quite coarse and lustrous, which is quite interesting. And they have contour hairs that are flat in the middle, which are quite typical of aquatic mammals. The length of their hair on the back and the belly differ a little, and is a further adaptation for these guys' semi-aquatic way of life. And their summer fur is somewhat shorter and less dense than their winter coat, like most of the animals. And in dark-colored individuals, the fur is dark brown or almost blackish brown. White lights are also reddish brown. Fur colors are easily distributed about the body, and then they typically, you can see they have that almost really cute little, white muzzle to them. And white markings usually in the neck and chest as well, but they do have that around. Though often the lower lips and chin are particularly white, but you do get particular dark individuals. There's lots of variation there. And then you get albinos and melanistics, so they get like dark colors and things like that. But as we mentioned, they are quite different from the American mink. There's several important differences. Their tail is longer than the American species. Their winter coat is not as dense and is more close-fitting than a European mink. They have white patches on their upper and lower lips, unlike American mink. And these guys are much less specialized for carnivory and kind of look like, babies. And they spend less time underwater, not quite as efficient as American mink. So in terms of denning behaviors and territory, they do not form large territories due to abundance of food. The size of each territory can be between 60 to 100 hectares, and they're typically more usual for territories to be 30 to 35 acres, or about 12 to 14 hectares. Those summers they can be smaller than winter hectares, and they just typically have a home stretch of about 50 to 60 meters along the river. About 250 to 2 kilometers. They do have permanent burrows and temporary shelters. They are used all year except during floods, and they're usually located more than 6 to 10 meters away from the water's edge. The construction of these burrows are not complex, often 1 to 2 passages of about 8 to 10 centimeters in diameter, 1.4 to 1.5 meters in length, with a nesting chamber that's between 48 to 55 centimeters. And these nesting chambers are lined with straws, moss, moose, wool, and bird feathers. and is more sedentary than American mink, which is confined to long periods of burrows, very cold weather. In terms of the mating season, we'll talk about these cute little babies while we get a chance. So these, oh no, that's not the right one. There we are. There we are, cute little baby. Actually, right to get the right wink this time. So during mating, the sexual organs, enlarge and become pinkish in color, and they've been observed copulating for up to 15 minutes to an hour. The average litter is about 3 to 7 kits, with the kits being born about 6.5 grams, or about 0.23 ounces, and grow rapidly, tripling their weight up to 10 days after birth. They're born blind, and their eyes will open about 30 to 31 days after birth. They will lactate. Lactation period lasts about 2 to 2.5 months, though these kits will eat solid food at about 20 to 25 days, and then accompany their mother on hunting expeditions as they, age between 56 to 70 days, and then become dependent between 70 to 84 days. In terms of their diet, these guys are consistent of eating a lot of aquatic and riparian fauna. They'll eat a lot of voles, but also crustaceans, insects, frogs, and fish as well. Being known to catch fish up to 1 kilogram in weight, or 1.2 kilograms, which is quite interesting. There's their range. Their range is mostly restricted to Europe, hence they're the European one. They can be found around, used to be found around northern Spain, up to the Urals, and around the Caucasus. But they've been extirpated from a lot of their range, especially around like Eastern Europe as well. But they're managed to re-establish in some areas as well, which is pretty cool. So the biggest declines have occurred in Germany. The earliest records of these declines have happened in Germany, and then it was observed in Switzerland, and then they've seen populations, go extinct over time in lots of places around Europe. But as I mentioned, a lot of the populations or reasons for this decline would have been habitat loss, the draining of small rivers and things like that, overhunting because people wanted to hunt them, for their fur, decline in crayfish. There's been believed to be declines in European crayfish in areas where they kind of went extinct or declined. Also, competition with disease and American minks. So American minks were introduced around the 1920s and 1930s. They're larger and outcompete these guys for the same niche. And then also hybridization and competition with polecats. So these guys can hybridize with polecats, and those hybrids don't do quite as well, which is a little bit sad. But other threats these guys include the golden eagles, red foxes, and wolves were believed to things as well. With wolves going extinct in a lot of Europe, red foxes got more popular, increased. So that would have hurt their populations. But yeah. Sadly, they are endangered, as I mentioned, for all those reasons, but hopefully there's some good conservation efforts. I'm pretty sure there is. There's got to be some good conservation efforts to try and help them. But yeah, really, really cool. How can you not love these guys? But yeah, another great cakes mod. But last but certainly not least, we've got everyone's favorite rhino. We've got the last rhino finally in the game. So we've got here the Sumatran rhino. Really, really awesome. So we've got the Sumatran rhino, or Deinonychus sumatrius. So these guys are also known as Sumatran rhino, hairy rhino, or the Asian two-horned rhino. These guys are a member of the Rhinoceridae, and they are one of the 5 living species of rhino. So the last one that's now it's finding in the game. They're the only extant member of its genus. They are considered the smallest of all the rhinos. But they're still really large. So typically, we'll get into that soon. So these guys were first documented in Fort Marlborough in Sumatra, and was sent to naturalist Joseph Banks, who actually described the species. Its sumatraensis is of Sumatra, so it's basically the rhino of Sumatra. It was Rhinoceros sumatraensis, and then Deinonychus, which means two nose or two horn. So it's the two-horned rhino from Sumatra. And there's a few different subspecies described. I'm not sure the validity of these guys, but there's the kind of western Sumatran rhino, the Bornean rhinoceros, and the northern Sumatran rhinoceros, which I believe a couple of them are extinct, which is a little bit sad, but depending on who you ask. So evolution, these guys are, as I mentioned, rhinos, so they're prosodactyls or odd-toed ungulates, and they have the same thing as other rhinos. Their genetic evidence suggests that these guys are more closely related to, Indian and Javan rhinos than your African rhinos, and they're believed to have split from each other about 14 million years ago, and then another split between Deinonychus and Rhinoceros, or the African rhinos, about 15 million years ago. In terms of its morphology, it actually looks quite a lot like the extinct woolly rhino, or Stephanrhinus, which actually being split about 9.5 million years ago. So the closest relatives are actually the kind of Merck's rhinos and woolly rhinos, which is quite interesting. And these guys were quite common around Europe and Asia in the Pleistocene, and then went extinct. And there's been some genetic evidence suggesting that these guys had a peak population of about 57,000 individuals about 950,000 years ago, and then declined to about 500 to 1,300 during the Holocene, and then a slight rebound, and then have kind of declined ever since. So these guys were never kind of that really popular animal or really common animal, which is a little bit sad, but they're really cool. Anyway, the mature Sumatran rhino stands about 112 to 145 centimeters, or about 3.6 to 4.7 feet high at the shoulder, and a body length between 236 to 318 centimeters, or about 7 to 10 feet long, and weigh between 500 and 800 kilograms, or about 1,100 to 1,700 pounds. The largest individuals have been recorded up to about 2 tons. And like the African rhinos, they do have 2 horns, which is quite interesting, with the longest recorded specimen having an 81 centimeter horn. And the posterior horn or the back horn is usually really small, about 10 centimeters. The one at the front could be a little bit bigger. And these horns typically are dark grey to black in colour, and the bulls typically have larger horns than the cows, and otherwise they're not typically sexually dimorphic. And they are estimated to live about 30 to 45 years in the wild, and we recorded living up to 32 years and 8 months in captivity. So these guys have 2 thick folds of skin between the front legs and the hind legs, and they also don't have much in terms of subcutaneous fat. And they're also a lot hairier than other rhinos. You can see they're quite hairy, which is part of their charm. However, they do grow to be much shaggier in captivity because their hair isn't getting rubbed off by going through all the vegetation in the forest. And typically they are covered in mud, but they do tend to be like a reddish colour because of the mud they wade in. But they do have kind of a reddish colour to them, like a reddish brown. And they do have patches of long ears and things like that at the end of the tail, patches of hair. And they do have poor vision, and they're actually quite fast and agile. They can climb mountains and easily traverse steep slopes and things like that, so they're quite good at that. So in terms of their distribution habitat, they do love lowland and highland forests, swamps and cloud forests. Historically, they used to be found around East India, Myanmar and Bangladesh, and even been found in Cambodia, Laos and Vietnam. But though all known living individuals now live in Sumatra. And some do they hope they survive in Burma, but we don't really know. It's kind of a cryptid thing. The last kind of reports were in the 1990s. They do widely scattered across their range because they're so depleted. The largest population, Sumatran's largest park, had a population of about 500 in the 1980s. But they've sadly gone down and down since then. Though genetic analyses have kind of found 3 distinct genetic lineages. The channel between Malaysia and Sumatra was not a significant barrier for them, but the ones during the Burma and Sundaland that kind of went down during the Holocene, that would have not been a much separation. But there's believed to be the rhinos of Borneo significantly distinct, but conservation geneticists actually argue that they shouldn't be breeding them together, but we don't really know. But they were actually thought to be extinct for a while, and then they found rhino tracks whilst looking for orangutans. So they did find a live Sumatran rhino in Kalimantan in Borneo. So they did find one, and it was captured and transported to a sanctuary, which is quite cool. And Iman, which was the last known Sumatran rhino that lived in Malaysia, died in 2019. Though stem cell technology actually was used to revive him, and then as of 2023, there have been 2 births of baby rhinos in the Sumatran Rhino Sanctuary in Waikabas National Park in Indonesia. So luckily we do have a couple babies, but we'll get into that. In terms of behavior or ecology, these guys are solitary, except for pairings and offspring. They have large home ranges, with territories being as large as 50 kilometers or 19 square miles, where females are typically 10 to 15 kilometers or 3 to 5 square miles. And they tend to be spaced out, so cows will live in the range of a few. The bull will have a few cows in his range, but there won't be any overlap with other bulls. They typically will mark their territory using soil or scat and things like that, using saplings, things like that. but they're usually more active also during when eating at dawn and just after dusk. And then during the day, they like to wallow in mud baths to cool down. And in the raining season, they move to higher elevations. And then in cooler months, they return down to the lower elevations. When mud holes are not available, they actually will make their own puddles, deepen them with their horns and feet. And they actually use it to maintain their body temperature and protect their skin from, parasites and things like that. Captive specimens, though, they actually are deprived of aquatic wallowing. They actually get broken skin, eye problems, and hair loss and things like that. So it's very important that they have a good wallow. And they actually have, there's been little evidence to suggest that things. In terms of predators, though, they have no known predators other than, tigers and wild dogs would have been capable of killing a calf, but I'm not sure how good they would be at killing an adult animal. And Asian elephants and Sumatran rhinos have been known to share trails, and many smaller species will use these trails that these larger animals create, to get through the forest. And they typically will make 2 trails across their range. Main trails are used by generations of rhinos to travel to important areas like salt licks and other corridors. Then in feeding areas, they make small trails, to kind of go out and feed on things, which is quite cool. In terms of their diet, though, so most feeding occurs just before nightfall in the morning. They are folivores, so they feed on leaves, twigs, and shoots, and things like that. They consume up to 50 kilograms or 1,110 pounds a day, and primarily by looking at dung samples, they've seen about 100 species of food consumed by rhinos, but typically, they're plant eaters. They tend to like food that are high in fiber and moderate protein, which is quite interesting, and they do use salt licks like other herbivores, to get the salt. That is hard to find their habitat. In terms of communication, though, they actually are the most vocal of all rhino species. They've been observed almost constantly vocalizing in zoos, and being shown in the wild, they actually make lots of yelps, and they're actually considered to be quite similar to the noises of humpback whales, which is quite interesting. They make lots of whistles and noises and things like that, which is quite cute, I think. They're very vocal rhinos, which is awesome. But now we'll talk about the reproduction as we look at that really, really cute little baby. So this is a little baby Sumatran rhino. Look at how cute he is. So cows will typically become sexually mature at about 6 to 7 years of age, and the bulls become sexually mature at about 10. Gestation period is about 15 to 16 months, where the baby is weaned, about that time. It would typically be born at between 40 to 60 kilograms, and it's weaned after about 15 months, but will stay with their mother for about 2 to 3 years of in its life. And the birth interval between each baby is about 4 to 5 years, which is natural offspring recorded behavior is unstudied. It's been studied quite a lot in captivity because, we want to breed them. They've been found, courtship period, they will raise their tail, urinate to show the time. They actually is most similar to those of black rhinos, though young Sumatran rhino bulls can often be too aggressive and sometimes injure or even kill them during courtship. In the wild, the female can run away, but in zoo enclosure, it's kind of hard not to. And the pestilence itself actually lasts about 24 hours and has placed its recurrence about 21 to 25 days. Sumatran rhinos have been observed copulating for about 30 to 50 minutes, and you have that brief cycle. But luckily, there has been a lot of evidence in trying to breed them in captivity, and using things like in vitro fertilization and research to try and help them. They typically ovulation is induced by mating, and they have underbutyl progesterone levels, so typically you have to have a mate to ovulate. It's quite interesting. But in terms of conservation, they are doing okay. Well, not okay at the moment, but they are critically endangered. So Sumatran rhinos are once quite numerous, but fewer than 100 individuals are estimated to exist. They are critically endangered because of a lot of things, as we'll get into. Poaching is a cause of concern as they've been overhunted for many centuries, and just populations just decline. Similar with African rhinos, they use their horn for traditional medicines, which is not true. It doesn't work at all. But other issues as well has been a lot of habitat destruction. So these guys they have to deal with illegal logging and things like that, which has destroyed a lot of their habitat. And the Bornean rhino was converted to be extinct in the wild in 2015, and the mainland Sumatran rhino in Malaysia was considered in 2015 extinct in the wild, which is a little bit sad. But that's the main issues they have, and there have been do not thrive outside the ecosystem. So they've been trying to breed them in captivity, especially places like London Zoo and Cincinnati Zoo, but that hasn't really been successful. So typically most breeding efforts in captivity have been kind of put to their, in their native range. So they typically do a little bit better there. And we've had some calves, which is quite cool. And only one female, as we mentioned, lives in this. They all live in the sanctuary, and there's been efforts to try and breed them, but we don't really know the many populations. It's just they're such in dire straits at the moment. They are really, they're down on their luck a bit because there's not many of them left. Luckily, there is babies born, so they're not quite out of the woods. They're not quite down and out yet. There has been lots of babies born. And there currently have been actually plans to, use in vitro fertilization and implant, different eggs into females. So to be able to help, bring genetic diversity and things like that, which is quite cool. But yeah, in terms of cultural depictions, aside from being kept in zoos and things like that, they haven't been really popular. They're kind of overshadowed by the Indian rhino, but I think they're just quite cool. And being so endangered, they do need all the love they can get, I think. Look at the adult here. But they are considered, the littlest rhino, which is quite cool. And lots of people, like taking pictures of them, and World Wildlife Fund try to effort to conserve them. They take lots of pictures. They're kind of elusive to find. But yeah, really, really cool. But yeah, kind of a sad story, as I mentioned, endangered, so endangered, critically endangered, and really awesome to talk about that. But yeah, a lot of the breeding programs have been controversial because they kind of really are not only aided. They argue that they have raised public awareness for the rhinos and things like that, but they haven't really had the chance to establish a good population yet in captivity. And luckily, there has been, they sent the last rhinos from Cincinnati Zoo to Indonesia to breed them. And there's, I believe, about to be 7 rhinos in the sanctuary at the moment, and there has been some calves born there, so that is good evidence that it's helping. Hopefully they can find more rhinos, and I think with lots of new technologies and things like that, we could actually see an increase. But obviously the biggest issues would be with poaching and habitat destruction, finding good habitat for these rhinos to live in, but also, stopping the demand for rhino horn would be the best way to help these species from extinction. But yeah, really, really awesome mod. Really nice to finally see a really nice Sumatran rhino mod. I've been waiting for one for years, and we finally got one. Really been excited to talk about the species and its conservation. But yeah, really, really awesome. So, I think this is a very great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to get the little bell icon to get notified with anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoy this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.